Coming up on today's show, vaccine wars, how the EU overplayed its hand and caused an international crisis overnight. The great vaccine rollout, a strong start, but has the government got the strategy right going forwards? The parents drowning in homeschooling, and how do we stop a fourth national lockdown? All that and much more coming up on today's TICE Talk. Yes, it's our second show of TICE Talk, the show where we explore the big issues of the day. We look at the stories that are making the news and we dissect the political system. And thank you firstly for all your comments on the first show, the good and the bad. And we'll try to respond as many as we can. And we're keen to hear your thoughts, so please do get involved. And the details are on the screen now. And with me to keep me on the straight and narrow is, of course, my good friend, Dr. David Bull. Welcome to TICE Talk.
Thank you very much indeed. I don't know how on earth I'll keep you on the straight and narrow.
I got told for interrupting too much first time.
Well, I didn't want to say anything, but you were very exuberant and over-enthusiastic, and that's a great thing. That's a great thing. And actually, look, I stand by what I said last week, which was, actually, this is a really important programme because I think what it does is it sort of adds a counterpoint to the mainstream media, and I think hopefully going forward we'll talk about the issues and we'll provide practical solutions going forward.
Yeah, and you know, we're going to try and look forward and forecast issues, problems coming down the track. Well,
indeed.
Let's look at what's news. Well, it's clear the big story of the week is the EU's extraordinary behaviour, unilaterally creating a vaccine war with the UK that was condemned widely around the world without any notice at all. It triggered the little-known Article 16 of the Brexit withdrawal agreement, and the aim was clear: to stop the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine from moving from the EU to the UK. But in doing so, the effect, it created a hard border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, which of course is the very thing that it was so adamant that it would protect throughout years of protracted Brexit negotiations. And the condemnation from world leaders was instant, incredible. The backtracking came from the EU immediately, all very embarrassing for the EU Commission. So, David, what do you think is the political fallout of the drama over the last few days?
I don't think we can underestimate just what an enormous gaffe this was politically, because of course, and you rightly say exactly that, and essentially it's because, and I think what it's highlighted for me is the fact that this is a bungling, bureaucratic, autocratic organisation, and by autocratic I mean it's run by people who are unelected, who make decisions on the part of millions of people. And so essentially the backstory to this is the EU wouldn't let each member state order vaccines, if you remember, and they said no, we have to do it all as one, all as one European Union. Well, of course, because they're so slow and because everything goes through committees, as we know, having been to Brussels, that because it has to go through committees, they just didn't get their act together. So the UK, we ordered our vaccines 3 months ahead of them. By the time they put in their orders, obviously the vaccine manufacturers are doing their best, but basically the problem was that the plants making the vaccine in Belgium were having real problems. So therefore, the vaccine manufacturer said, look, we can't actually fulfill the obligation that we said, and your vaccine will be slower. And at that point, they then threatened legal action, and crucially, this is the bit that's really important, they then said they would stop the flow of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine into the United Kingdom, therefore creating that border on the island of Ireland. That is the thing they've banged on about for years.
For years and years. And then we've also got the situation where we've got the president of France, Monsieur Macron. He's now saying, he's sort of casting dispersions on the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine. I mean, what's he saying about that?
Well, I think, to be honest, it's jealousy, isn't it? The UK, you know, I said this last week, the UK has done an extraordinary job, and hats off to Nadeem Zahawi, because actually he has done a remarkable job. Just looking at the figures now, 9 million vaccines have been given in that first dose. We've done nearly 500,000 of the second dose vaccines. That is extraordinary. So Macron is very upset, and I think there are a number of reasons for that. One is that we obviously have the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. We also have the Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine. So what Macron then said was, oh, that British vaccine, it doesn't work in the over 65s. Well, quite frankly, that isn't right, and it's actually dangerous. And Sir John Bell, who was part of that committee that looked at the safety, said, frankly, that is wrong, it's dangerous, and you need to stop.
And then we've got the German medical regulator also saying that they're not going to use the AstraZeneca vaccine also for the over 65s. And I'm thinking to myself, well, hang on, folks, you're threatening to sue AstraZeneca
because
to get more of the vaccine, but then you're saying you don't want to use it on the people who need it most, the over 65s. There's a certain irony here, isn't there?
There is an enormous irony, but the thing is, for me as a medic, the most important message I can get out to people is we need to vaccinate as many people as we can in the fastest possible time. And interestingly, I've had people, including my mum, saying, she's now been contacted, saying, which one should I have? Because she knows, because she's clever, that at certain surgeries you might get the Pfizer-BioNTech, but at the other one you get the Oxford-Astra. And the answer is you get the one that's closest and you get the one that's quickest, because actually they all offer a really good level of immunity, and the sooner you get the first vaccine means the sooner you get the second vaccine, and then we get up to 90% levels of protection.
Which is fantastic. So, you know, we've got some 9 million people, give or take, being vaccinated, which is amazing. So we're now at a critical couple of weeks as we look forwards, because what we should be seeing is that actually the impact of those vaccinations should start to show through in terms of reduced hospitalisations, but most importantly, a reduction in the death numbers. And that's really important where this goes.
It is, and we're already seeing new cases starting to fall, which is good, but you're right, there's a lag phase, isn't there? And the thing is, I think one of the things that we need to be really careful about is mainstream media are still going to tell you how many people are dying of COVID, but COVID will never go away. What is more important, or deaths will never go away, what we need to look at is establishing baseline deaths. Older people die in February. That is what happens every single year. What we now need to do is to make sure we actually look at the data, and by the time we get back to more normal levels, we can say that actually we've pretty much got this under control.
So what we hope, I mean, we hope that the huge excess deaths that we've seen in January, those excess deaths, hopefully, over the next couple of weeks, will reduce back to the normal sad number of deaths that you get every day, throughout a month like February, during the winter months. But hopefully if that reduces down to the norm, but we will still be seeing COVID-related deaths from people who sadly, they have reached the end of their life. And so many people at this time of the year do sadly die of some form of respiratory illness. And talk to us just briefly about what's happened to the flu and pneumonia numbers.
Well, the flu and pneumonia, of course, have gone down. And the reason that they've gone down enormously is because, of course, everyone is socially isolating. So it's very interesting, isn't it, that we've completely changed our behaviour. But I'm a great believer that in the ecosystem, when you suppress one virus, nature has a great way of bringing another one back. And in fact, I was talking to a consultant only yesterday about actually that very careful balance of the ecosystem. So we will never eradicate all disease. I don't think it's possible, and it's not within the grasp of nature. Nature is very clever, and it reinvents. And these viruses, the minute you get on top of them, they will change and they will reinvent.
That's right. And so I think we are going to have to come to terms with this difficult fact. You'll never get to zero COVID-related deaths. And it may be, there may be a sort of an education for all of us. We might be here in 4 or 5 weeks' time, and there are still hundreds of people who are still dying as a COVID-related death. And that may be with us for a long time.
And I think we have to get used to the idea that it will be with us, but once we have immunised the elderly and the vulnerable, then really we have to unlock, because the thing is, we cannot cower away from this illness forever. We need to open the economy, and we need to let people get their mental health back, to get children back to school, and all the things that we've talked about. We are at the beginning of the end, I hope.
We hope. Goodness me, we hope. Well, that's the news. So now we move on to the forgotten. Each week, we want to focus on a group who is particularly suffering under lockdown. so we can really understand the misery, the pain that's being caused. And it looks as though lockdown will continue until late spring, possibly early summer. And the government isn't even going to tell us its plan to ease restrictions until mid to late February. And personally, I don't like the narrative that's being used to delay the easing. David, what do you think?
No, I don't. I think people are so fed up now. I think they played ball for a very long time. I think people now just want an end, but I think they need to see an end in sight. They need to be given some sort of signpost. And of course, we've talked before about sort of the forgotten people in this, the people, you know, the mental health issues. I've heard those stories about children who were doing terribly well at school and then have regressed, particularly the elderly who have been socially isolated. And I've heard young children saying that they don't want to live anymore because it's not worth living because they can't see their friends. Now, that is a desperate, desperate state of affairs.
Desperate.
And all that, you know, it's got to change. But let's also not forget that, as I said last week, this is really turning into a COVID-only service. We've lost a lot of beds. Yep. We've gone from 180,000 to 140,000. We have so many people waiting, 4.5 million people waiting for elective procedures. And we also have, you know, tens of thousands of people waiting for cancer care as well. So, you know, it is a desperate situation. And I know we'll talk about that later, but the NHS is going to be in trouble for a long time.
It is. I mean, there's no question at all. The pressure is going to be there. We're going to talk about it later in the show under the TICE report.
We certainly are. So each week we're going to focus on parents of young children and the horrendous challenges of homeschooling whilst trying to juggle work commitments. So here to tell her story, we are both delighted to welcome from Wales, Kirsty Walmsley. Kirsty, very good to see you.
Hi, Kirsty.
Hi.
It must be absolutely horrific trying to juggle homeschooling with work, with all your other commitments. Just very quickly, tell me, when the government announced this latest lockdown, how did you react?
To be honest, I cried. I was absolutely devastated to hear that we'd be going through homeschooling again. And I don't think I'm the only one. I was listening to the producer of Mumsnet, and they have a swear meter on there. And I believe that when the announcement came out, the swearometer went off.
I'm not surprised.
So I'm definitely not alone. I spoke to my father, and I told him how difficult this was going to be, and he said, "Well, didn't you see this coming?" And I said, "No, not really, because Boris Johnson told me 2 days ago that they wouldn't be closing schools. So no, I didn't see it coming."
And what's been, obviously you've had a few weeks now of homeschooling, Kirsty. What's been sort of the low point, the biggest challenge so far?
I just think it's because it's relentless. So there's no break. It's every day, and it's trying to balance home and work. So for people that don't have children, that aren't going through homeschooling, to help them to understand, it's very much like taking on a second job. Somebody saying, "Can you do this second full-time job and try and fit it into your day around your regular job?" It's impossible. And with the work that we're getting from school, so I have 2 children. I have a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old. So I'm actually trying to teach 2 different curriculums and 2 different sets of lessons on top of work. It's absolutely impossible. I do the best I can, but it's really hard. Really hard.
I have many nephews and nieces, and I talk to them a great deal. And the impact from what I've seen, not just from them, but from many children, is it's really profound on their mental health, on their development. And, you know, I was just saying to Richard about children who said that, you know, they don't see the point in living if they can't see their friends. What's been the impact for your kids?
Well, I think what you're saying is absolutely heartbreaking, and I can completely understand it. My 7-year-old's been in floods of tears, and when I've gone to her and said, "Darling, what's the matter?" she said, "Mummy, I want to go back to school. I really miss my friends." So, you know, we're very lucky in the situation that we're in, but there's lots of parents that are in more challenging situations than me, and my heart really goes out to them. I have friends who have suffered with mental health issues in the past who are now being asked to homeschool 3 children. Also, I know parents who are very hands-on and want to do the best for their children, but they have had learning difficulties themselves in the past and have terrible dyslexia. So, you know, there are lots of situations that are worse than mine, but I really feel for the children. I mean, mine are really little, but I also have a niece who's a teenager, and she's doing her A-levels, and she's really struggling, not seeing her friends.
And how important, Kirsty, is it for you and for the children to have a target date when you know actually you can get back to school, so that there's some hope, there's some light at the end of this horror show, you know, for the children and for parents?
I think it's absolutely crucial. Thinking back to when the announcement was made that there were going to be school closures, it was so last minute. The evening that the announcement was made, my children were tucked up in their beds with their uniforms neatly laid out for the next day. And when I went to them the next morning, they were really excited. They were going to see their friends again. And I said, I'm really sorry, but you're not going to be going to school today. And I think I had no time to prepare my day and how I was going to manage my time with the children. And the situation just seems to continue. I mean, at the moment, Boris Johnson has said that he hopes schools will be open, hopes schools will be reopening from the 8th of March. But for me, the words hope aren't good enough. We need solid dates to work to. We need when the children are going back.
And what happens, Kirsty, if it is delayed, if the children don't go back till after the summer holidays, which could be possible? I know the government says otherwise. How will you feel?
Well, I'm very, very concerned about that. Again, going back to the children's mental health and also their progress. When I spoke to the teachers at my own school after the last lockdown, they said that I asked how the children were doing, were they catching up okay? And the feedback I got was very much, no, they're not, they're really struggling. So I don't think we can go back and quickly bring the children back up. I mean, they've nearly missed a whole year of schooling.
I know, it's unbelievable. And I mean, the inequality gap between those schools that are able to provide, you know, a really good online provision and those that for whatever reason are not able. I mean, you know, this just grows wider and wider.
It does. I have to say, Kirsty, I think you've done tremendously well, and actually you look remarkably well given what you're trying to juggle. And I know that we all wish you the best of luck going forward, and stay strong. Stay strong, Kirsty. Great to see you smiling. Thank you very much. Thanks for sharing those thoughts with us all. It's really, really helpful. That's great. Thank you. So there's Kirsty. I mean, do you think the government has any idea how difficult this is for parents like Kirsty and millions of others around the country? I think if you're stuck as a minister in a ministerial job with money, you know, where you're getting a salary, I know they're working hard and everything, but they don't really see the costs, what it's doing to family life, to what it's doing to the stresses and strains on families. And that includes, you know, people who have two parents, but those people who are single parents, trying to work, trying to juggle. It's hardly surprising we're seeing rocketing rates of people drinking alcohol, trying desperately to cope. There has to be an end. There has to be an end. And, you know, it was almost hard to ask the question, you know, how much is it damaging the relationship between the child and the parent? You could see Kirsty getting emotional there. I felt emotional. I mean, you know, it really is, you know, we have to have an end. We have to get the schools back. And more importantly, we must learn from this. Yes. Because when the next pandemic comes, we need to have learnt lessons. This is, you know, we've done well to get to this point. We need an end to it, we need an inquiry, and we need to learn lessons for the future so it never happens again. Well, thank you, David. And what is clear is people like Kirsty, parents, children on this show, they are not forgotten. And please do share your comments for the forgotten part of the show so that we can include them, and send them to TICE Talk at reformtv.uk. The details are on the screen. Each week, we want to lighten the mood and bring you some good news stories in this difficult time. So we're going to go over to our reporter, Evan Boothby.
A very big hello and welcome to my brand new segment, For Evan's Sake. My name's Evan and I'll be here each week to drop by with some feel-good, uplifting and comical stories to show you guys at home some of the absolute best of British. Although next week I'll be on the hunt for some of your fun and fabulous news stories, this week I'll be having a look at some of my favourite comical videos that have come from the lockdown. Each week, I'll also be choosing my favourite video from the past week, so do send in some of your suggestions. It makes my job a lot easier and I love watching them. So this week I want to show you my top 3 funny videos to come out of the lockdown so far. Starting with number 3, let's get stuck in with this very clever dad who's clearly had enough of being stuck at home, and he's found the most genius way to hide from his children. Take a look at this.
Oh, no, he is.
How brilliant is that? I think we've all been in situations where we want to do something like that before. So, at number 2, how can you not smile at this person's boredom creation? Using a sock puppet to eat the passing cars. I think it's brilliant. Have a look. And finally, my top comical video of this lockdown has to be this lady. She has found the perfect way to cope with homeschooling her kids when it comes to maths. Take a look at this and I challenge you not to crack a smile. Have a look.
Fractions. A quarter. A half. 3/4. A whole. 3/4. A half. A quarter. None. Recap.
There we have it, my top 3 lockdown videos of all time. Remember, it's not all doom and gloom and there is always a fun side to lockdown in true British style. If you've got a good news story that you'd like me to cover on upcoming episodes, then please do get in touch. Thanks for watching for Evan's sake, and it's back to Richard in the main studio.
Lots of fun. I mean,
the one with the lady in the wine just tickles me. I don't know why. It's just that desperation, isn't it?
I wish if I'd learnt maths like that.
But also, as she does it, she's then, and a quarter, and then a half. But also, I think all parents can relate to that.
Everybody can relate to that.
Because, you know, I think it's desperate times call for desperate measures.
Absolutely. You know, Kirsty earlier, you could just see that.
So do send us your comedy clips. You can email ticetalk@reformtv.uk.
And now, it's time for the TICE report. We now come to the part of the show where we dissect the political system, and this week we delve into the NHS and whether it's fit for purpose for the next 10 to 20 years. Now, I've talked before about the need to focus on capacity, NHS capacity to deal with crises, how to prepare for next winter and beyond. And pre-COVID, there were always huge winter pressures. And the truth is, maybe the NHS has just run hot, too hot, for a decade or more.
I couldn't put it better. I couldn't put it better. I mean, look, we've lost so many beds. You know, we had 180,000, we're down to 140,000. Even when I was a junior doctor, we had far more beds that we could discharge people to, and there was more capacity. But let's look at the headlines from the papers, because it's almost surprising there are winter pressures. Let's look, first of all, at The Guardian. Look, every single year, there is another headline about hospitals in crisis, more patients, overstretched doctors. Every single year. It's not just The Guardian either. If you then go to the BBC News, you'll see exactly the same winter narrative between 2014 and 2019. Will this winter be the worst? Up to A&E waits for January, the worst ever. So the point is that we cannot... and look, we believe greatly in solutions, not problems. Yeah. So that's the problem. The solution is we need to build capacity, because it doesn't take very much for the whole system to fall over. Yeah. And that's what we need to do going forward.
And that's what we've seen, isn't it? You know, I mean, we know that if it runs that hot, the moment there's a crisis, then it's going to fall over. And that's what we've got to build in. So how are we going to improve that capacity? And where do we sit relative to other nations?
Well, I think, you know, of course we need to improve capacity. And the thing is that slightly irritates me at the moment is that we're being told this whole mantra of protect the NHS. Well, surely the NHS should be there to protect us. And so therefore, and the doctors and nurses and all the auxiliary staff, everyone is working incredibly hard. So we have to increase capacity. And we need to do that in a number of ways. Increase the beds, increase the doctors, increase the nurses. Crucially, train more doctors. And so the bottlenecks at universities have got to go. And there are a series of graphs that I think can illustrate that.
And these are really interesting to understand just exactly where the UK sits with the NHS relative to other nations.
Yeah, so let's look at this one. So this is doctors per 1,000 of population. The UK, we are really right over on the right-hand side. Look how many doctors they have in Austria. 5.2, we are at 2.9. So, you know, you can't exactly compare each of those countries, but Germany has a very good health system, 4.3 doctors per 1,000, the UK much beyond. Now, the US, you may see they're at 2.6, but I don't think that's true data because it's skewed because you're not comparing like with like, you're not comparing apples and apples.
And just to be clear, this data is coming from the latest OECD data. So, you know, it is up to date.
It is.
But
well, let's look at beds. Let's look at the beds graph then and just show, you know, I talked about the fact we've lost 40,000 of those beds. So look here. So you've got Germany there, 8 hospital beds per 1,000. 2.5 for the UK.
I mean, it seems extraordinary. That, you know, you look at those numbers, compare us to France. You know, we're give or take half the French number. You know, these are big, big differences. And I think there has to be an appreciation because that's, you know, these are the key elements of capacity that you need in order to cope with the surges.
Totally right.
You know, the crises.
And of course, we can move now to the next one of our graphs, which will show, again, the pressures that are sitting on the system. And so if we look at health spending, and we spend an awful lot on our health service, but you can see we're on the right again. And this, for me, is very interesting because we need to look at the US, way above us. However, spending more money doesn't mean that you have a better healthcare system. And the outcomes in America are worse per patient than they are in the UK. But what it does say is actually we need a proper conversation. How much are we willing to invest?
Well, that's the point. Is that all of these graphs, you can see we're always over on the right. And, you know, any of those metrics, we are somewhere between 30–40% lower than, you know, comparable nations that we would want to be equivalent to. And that's going to mean that as we come out of this crisis, we've got to build in some capacity and we're going to have to invest. And to do that, we're going to need to have, we've got to have a fast-growing economy that can generate additional wealth so that actually, as a nation, we've got additional money to invest in the NHS to make sure we've got that capacity.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, Brexit gives us a great sort of a mechanism of doing this because actually we can reduce the burden that we were put on us by the EU, so we can let SMEs be flexible and nimble and raise tax revenue, and tax revenue pays for the NHS. So actually, I see this as the beginning of a bright new future.
No question at all. But I mean, you know, it's a massive national conversation that's got to take place and take place soon. Because what we can't afford is a fourth national lockdown.
No.
And unless we get on top of this capacity issue, I talked last week about actually rebuilding the Nightingales, you know, as capacity, and actually that's been quite well received. And you know about bringing in retired medics, doctors and nurses.
I'm really keen on this. You know, there are tens of thousands of retired medics, doctors and nurses and so on, including people like me. I'm really ready and willing and able, and I've got all the checks to do it and to go back in, but we haven't mobilised them yet. So what we need is that reserve army, that territorial medics ready to stand by to help those people on the front line.
Well, that's great. Thank you, David. We're going to be talking in a few weeks' time about how we grow the economy faster, how we reform the economy, so we've got that extra money to invest in the NHS. Thank you very much. So, David, let's see what people have been talking about, the comments we've had this week. And the first one came from Robert. He said he'd heard on the radio that the median average age of a person in intensive care is 60, and therefore the vaccine rollout will have some way to go before relieving the pressure on the NHS, and that probably is wise words. I then got a second email from Judith. She said, following on from last week, her own son, self-employed in the theatre industry, hanging on literally by a thread because of government policies. And she also asks, actually, what was the outcome? Did I get a response to my letter to Matt Hancock, my 11-page letter before Christmas? Was there any response? Well, surprise, surprise, no reply there.
Well, that's surprising.
Not even a Christmas card. And then the final comment here was from David. Now, he said, actually, he profoundly disagreed with regard to teachers, that there was no justification for vaccinating teachers in front of other vulnerable people. Well, I think, in truth, we're not saying ahead of vulnerable people, but what we are saying is then it's the fastest, most pragmatic way in order to get millions of children back into school, and surely we must do
It's
that.
what you keep going on about, common sense approach.
Common sense approach. So thank you for those comments. Please do send us your views, your comments, your ideas, the details on the screen to ticetalk@reformtv.uk, and we'll answer your questions as we can. Thank you very much for that. And now we move on to the uplifting part of the show, where we mention special thanks to people who've done great work in the public sector. And please do put forward your suggestions, your experiences, where people have gone above and beyond, and we can mention them on the show. But this week, without question, I want to give massive thanks to Kate Bingham. She's worked in the life sciences, private sector. She's helped fund and manage companies. She then received, last May, a call from Boris to set up the vaccine task force, which she duly did. And she brought in other top people from the private sector. And it's thanks to them that we are so far ahead, that we've identified the vaccines early. They ordered the vaccines early. They helped fund the facilities to manufacture the vaccines early. And here we are, an incredible nation now as we speak. And there's no doubt, the UK is leading the world. And she did this as a volunteer, her contribution to the nation. I think this is a brilliant example of how private sector expertise and input can help the government and the nation. And we need far more of it in every section of government. Well, that's all we've got time for this week on TICE Talk. Remember, please do get in touch using the details on the screen. And remember to share news of the show with your friends. Well, David, thank you very much for your input, your wisdom as always.
Well, that's very kind, Richard. Thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure, and I look forward to doing it all again next week.
Great. So please do, yes, join us next week for more politics, more alternative views and good, honest opinions. Thank you for watching. See you next time.